let's jump into a topic you guys picked: land taxation. We're going deep today, folks. History, economics, you name it. We've even got some psychology in the mix. Our sources take us everywhere. Ancient China, modern England. We found some pretty surprising stuff along the way, so buckle up.
It is wild how something like land taxes, I mean, something most people just think of as another bill, has actually had such a massive impact on how societies function for thousands of years, really.
It really makes you think, right? Like under the surface of this thing we all kind of take for granted, there's this whole hidden story about power, wealth, how civilizations actually work, the whole deal.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
today, we're on a mission. Two parts, really. First, we're going to uncover the hidden history of land taxes, how they've shaped societies across history. Then, we got to tackle those modern tax systems. What works, what's broken, and who's really winning in the current setup.
Yeah, and maybe the most important thing, could land taxation help us solve some of the huge problems we're facing today? This isn't just some dry economic theory. It gets into some pretty deep stuff, cultural beliefs about ownership, what's fair, even masculinity, which I know is something you're interested in.
For sure. Okay, so let's dive right in. This example from ancient China, the well field system, really blew my mind. So back in the Zhou dynasty, they had this way of dividing the land, these 9 squares, and the produce from that central square, boom, went straight to the state. Basically their version of a land tax.
It's incredible, right? It wasn't just about taxes, though. It was like their social contract, this way to try to balance out the needs of the state with the needs of the people. So the state, they provide security, infrastructure, all that, and in return, people contribute, a portion of their crops. And get this, even Confucius, yeah, the guy whose ideas on social harmony are still huge today, he actually praised this whole well-field system for being like super fair. Equitable distribution, he called it.
It makes you wonder, if they could pull that off way back then, what's stopping us from rethinking how we do things today? Land ownership, taxes, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah, that's a huge question, and it's one we're going to keep coming back to throughout this whole deep dive. It's crucial to understand that this wasn't some weird Chinese thing. Land taxes, they've been a core part of civilizations all over the world. Mesopotamia, Roman Empire, I mean, everywhere. Leaders used them to fund their governments, build public works. The ways they did it changed, obviously, but that main idea stayed the same.
Land as a fundamental resource, well, it's kind of essential for governing.
Makes sense. All right, fast forward a bit, 1086. We got William the Conqueror marching through England with his Doomsday Book. Talk about some serious record keeping. Oh, yeah, that Doomsday Book, it was totally revolutionary for its time. One of the first times anyone tried to systematically track, who owned what land for tax purposes. It was super detailed, this massive survey, and it really changed the game because suddenly they had a crystal clear picture, like who owned what and how much it was all worth. It made collecting taxes way more efficient, and it really set that precedent, that accurate record keeping is essential, something we're still struggling with even today.
Right. Shows you that documentation and financial responsibility, I mean, they've always been linked, haven't they? But things can go bad quick when those land taxes start to feel unfair, Like what happened with the English Peasants' Revolt back in 1381.
Exactly, that revolt. Oppressive poll taxes, demands for fairer land taxes, that's what kicked it all off. It's a pretty stark reminder that when people feel like the system is rigged against them, well, social unrest, it's bound to happen.
Yeah, you're right. It's not just about avoiding unrest, though. History's also shown us that land taxes, when done right, they can drive progress, big time. Take the medieval Italian city-states, Venice, Florence, those are powerhouses, right? And a big chunk of their success came from their ability to tax land and trade.
No doubt about it. They use that money to do a lot, really. Building infrastructure, funding military stuff, supporting incredible cultural projects, all of it. Those investments transformed them into these hubs, commerce, innovation. They were attracting talent and wealth from all over Europe.
Pretty inspiring, right? Seeing how they used land taxes to accomplish so much, it kind of makes you think about what we could achieve today if we harness that power.
Definitely worth considering. But to really grasp the potential, we need to look at how those modern tax systems actually work, how things have evolved. Because that Industrial Revolution, that was a huge turning point. Not just about new technologies, it's about wealth, shifting away from land being the primary source and moving towards income. That fundamentally reshaped how we think about taxes.
Right, and those enclosure acts in England are a perfect example of that. I mean, privatizing all those common lands, it forced tons of families off their land into those awful urban slums. A real heartbreaking example of how those economic changes can have such massive social consequences.
Yeah, and all that displacement, it led straight to the rise of income taxes. Governments were scrambling, trying to figure out new ways to make money. So you had income taxes introduced in Britain in 1799 to fund those Napoleonic Wars, and then later in the US, 1861, to fund the Civil War. It was a big shift. Wealth became tied to what you earned, not just the land you owned. And, we'll get into this more, but it's had a huge impact on economic inequality, something I know you're concerned about.
So are you saying that the way we do taxes now, are these systems just inherently flawed because they're based on this shift away from land as the main source of wealth?
It's complicated, honestly. Modern tax systems are complex, Income taxes, they fund all those important public services, right? But they've also been used to, well, to manipulate things, economic outcomes, to benefit certain groups over others. You can even look back at the French Revolution. I mean, they were trying to create a fairer system. That was the whole point. But the aristocracy and the church, they pushed back hard. It didn't go as smoothly as they hoped.
Right.
And then in the 19th and 20th centuries, things got even messier. Those tax codes, they became so complex, full of loopholes, and it was the wealthy who really knew how to exploit them.
Yeah, like that crazy high top marginal tax rate in the US in the 1950s, over 90%. Sounds progressive on the surface, but all those super rich folks, they figured out how to shield their income.
That's the thing. They made most of their money from capital gains, dividends, stuff like that, all taxed at way lower rates. And guess what? This pattern, it's still going strong today. In England, for example, the top 10% of landowners, they control more than half the land, but they're paying hardly any taxes on its value. It's a system that straight up rewards ownership over work, And that's a problem, a big one, that we really need to deal with.
So is land value taxation? Is that the answer?
It's definitely a promising option, but before we get into all that, I think it's worth taking a look at how land taxes have historically done more than just, make money for the government. They've funded some pretty amazing public goods, stuff that's shaped our societies in positive ways.
Oh yeah, like Central Park in New York City, right, that green space. Land revenues help make that happen. Or how about those stunning medieval cathedrals in Notre Dame in Paris, built using funds raised through land taxes on the communities around them.
Right. These examples, they really show how land taxes, they can create this lasting value that benefits everyone, not just about filling up government coffers, and this isn't just ancient history either. Look at the London Underground. One of the biggest public transportation systems in the world, right, relied partly on land revenues for its funding. And even the Marshall Plan, that massive effort to rebuild Europe after World War II, guess what? Partly financed by land taxes.
Wow. So the potential is there, clearly. But the question is, how do we actually use it in a way that's fair, effective, all that?
Absolutely. And to do that, we got to understand those philosophical and psychological barriers, the stuff that often gets in the way of actually reforming, land taxes.
Which is exactly where we'll pick up in part 2 of our deep dive.
All right, so let's dig into the philosophy behind land ownership for a bit. Even thinkers like Karl Marx and Henry George, guys we might not always agree with, they really wrestled with this whole issue.
Yeah. Marx, with his whole, revolutionary ideas, he argued that private land ownership should just be, abolished, completely done away with. He saw it as the root of exploitation, inequality, stuff that's still super relevant today.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Marx, he believed that land being such a fundamental resource, it shouldn't be a way for individuals to profit, right? It should be controlled by the people, for the benefit of all. His ideas have been, obviously super influential, but there are definitely some criticisms. Some people argue that they're impractical or could even lead to more problems, not less.
Pretty radical idea, no doubt, even today. But Henry George, he kind of offered a more, pragmatic approach, didn't he?
He did. George, he was all about land value taxation. His argument was, well, it was simple, but it was powerful, He said that the increase in land value, that happens because of stuff outside the owner's control, things like population growth, new infrastructure, all that. It shouldn't just benefit the person who owns the land, right? He called it the unearned increment of land value, and he thought it should be returned to society.
So basically, tax those unearned profits from the land and use the money to, benefit everyone. I can definitely see how that would appeal to, folks who care about fairness, social justice, all that.
It's an idea that keeps popping up throughout history in different forms. But to really understand why there's so much resistance, we need to look at, the psychology of ownership.
Because messing with people's land, I don't know, it's a sensitive topic, isn't it? It feels very personal.
Yeah, absolutely. Land is often way more than just an asset, you know? It's like a psychological anchor, the symbol of stability, security, especially when things are uncertain. Like, think back to the 2008 financial crisis. While stocks were crashing, banks failing, the value of farmland in the US, it stayed pretty stable.
That's true. When everything else feels shaky, land feels like something solid, something you can actually hold on to.
Right. And it's tied to our identities in a big way. For a lot of people, owning land, it's like this marker of achievement, you know? Having a stake in the future. It's not just about the money, it's about belonging, having roots somewhere.
So if someone comes along and says, hey, we need to change how we tax land, it can feel like a personal attack, like you're messing with their sense of self, their place in the world.
Exactly. And that's where behavioral economics comes in. There's this thing called the endowment effect. Basically, it explains why people tend to overvalue things simply because they own them.
Like that study with the coffee mugs, right? They gave people mugs and asked them how much they'd sell them for, and the ones who owned the mugs wanted way more money than those who didn't.
Yeah, that's a classic example. Same thing applies to land, you know? Ownership creates this inflated sense of value, and it makes it really hard to have rational discussions about land tax reform. People feel like they're losing something precious, even if that value is, well, kind of subjective.
It's like those debates about inheritance taxes.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you get the arguments for, redistributing wealth, it can feel super personal when it's your family's land, your assets.
You got it. And then you add in the fact that cultural attitudes towards land ownership, they're super diverse and they run deep. Western societies, they emphasize individual ownership, but tons of cultures have these traditions of communal land stewardship.
Right, like the Maasai in Kenya and Tanzania, they share grazing rights. Or those village commons in parts of India, the land's managed collectively.
Those examples really challenge that Western idea that, individual ownership is the only legitimate way to hold land. And we gotta acknowledge the impact of colonialism, right? It played a huge role in shaping how land is owned all over the world.
Absolutely. When those colonial powers came in and forced private land ownership on societies that had, communal systems, it totally disrupted things. Systems that had worked for centuries. And a lot of times it led to inequalities that are still around today.
And that baggage, it adds another layer of complexity to the whole discussion of land tax reform, In a lot of former colonies, land taxes are seen as just another tool of exploitation, like a continuation of that colonial dispossession.
So with all these psychological and cultural barriers, where do we even start? It feels like trying to climb a mountain.
It's a tough one, for sure, but I think it starts with education, helping people understand that historical context, but also the potential benefits of, reforming these land tax systems. We got to communicate these ideas in a way that connects with people's values, not just their wallets.
So less about the dry economic theory and more about fairness, building stronger communities, stuff like that.
Exactly. And that's where strong leadership is so crucial, We need leaders who can paint a vision of a more equitable society. Help people see that land taxation isn't just a burden, it's an investment in our shared future.
That sounds like a lot to ask. Where do we find these leaders?
It is a challenge, no doubt, but history's full of examples of leaders who fought for and won these land tax reforms. Their stories are really valuable, they offer lessons for anyone who wants to make the world more just, more sustainable.
Okay, I'm ready for some hope here. Tell me about some of those leaders who, they managed to navigate this whole land tax thing.
Let's look at Taiwan in the 1950s. They made land value taxation a key part of their economic reforms. Help them fund infrastructure development, reduce all that speculative landholding. And they did it by really connecting with people, They showed them that reform wasn't just about taxes, it was about a fairer society for everyone.
That's a good point. It's not enough to just throw out numbers and economic arguments. You got to appeal to people's sense of fairness, their desire for a better future.
Absolutely. And South Korea, that's another great example. Late 1980s, they had a huge housing crisis. Land speculation was out of control. And their president, Roh Tae-woo, even though he had a ton of political opposition, he pushed through these big land tax reforms. His leadership, it was key. He built this coalition of support, explained the benefits clearly, really communicated. And the result, a more stable, more equitable housing market.
So it can be done, even with all that pushback. But it takes courage, leaders who are committed to making the world a better place.
It does. And those leaders, they need the support of people who are informed, engaged, all of that. That's why educating ourselves, raising awareness, it's so important.
Right. People need to understand how land taxes actually work, how they can benefit everyone, not just a select few, and how we can design them to make sure they're protecting the most vulnerable among us.
Exactly. And we got to be realistic, right? Of forming these land tax systems, it's not going to be a walk in the park. There will be legal hurdles, political pushback, people who, like the current system, are going to fight hard. But this issue, it's just too important to ignore.
You're right. We've seen what happens when land is unequally distributed. Housing crises, the environment gets wrecked, social unrest, political instability. It's a mess.
And we've also seen what land tax reform can achieve, when it's done right. Funding those essential public services, creating communities that are more equitable, more sustainable. Land taxes, they can be a powerful tool for building a better future. It's not a cure-all, but it's part of the solution.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've gone through the history, the philosophy, even the psychology of owning land. Now let's get down to brass tacks. How have land taxes been used to tackle real-world issues, make a difference?
Yeah, great point. Let's start with a modern example, Detroit. Early 2000s, Detroit's property tax system, it was really hurting homeowners, They were already struggling, incomes were down, and the city relied so heavily on taxing those buildings, it actually drove people out, like a mass exodus. Left all these abandoned homes, and the tax base just shrunk and shrunk.
Tough situation for sure. A system that might have had good intentions, but, things change, and it just didn't adapt. So how does this land value taxation, how does that offer a solution in a case like Detroit?
Well, it shifts the focus, right? Away from the buildings and onto the land itself. So instead of punishing people for improving their property, you encourage them to develop it, make it better. It also discourages what we call speculative landholding, basically sitting on land, doing nothing with it, just waiting for the value to go up.
Interesting. So it's more proactive, right? You're rewarding development instead of penalizing it.
That's the idea. And it helps with those artificially inflated property prices, the ones driven by speculation. When you tax land based on its value, no matter what's on it, speculators, they're less likely to hoard it. That can lead to a more efficient land market, one that's fairer for everyone.
Okay, I see the logic, but I got to ask, does this stuff actually work in the real world? Any success stories we can look at?
Oh, absolutely. Plenty of them. Pennsylvania is a great example. They started using a land value tax system in a bunch of cities, Pittsburgh included, way back in the late 1800s. And, there was pushback at first, but the results have been pretty impressive.
Okay, I'm all ears. What happened in Pennsylvania?
Well, that shift to taxing land value, it really boosted local investment. People weren't afraid to fix up their properties anymore, so they started renovating, upgrading, and it revitalized the whole city. New schools, parks, public spaces, all that.
Wow, so the tax revenue was actually used to make things better for everyone?
Yeah.
Sounds like a win-win.
It was. And it wasn't just infrastructure either. Homeowners saw their property taxes go down, which meant families had more money in their pockets. Pennsylvania's unemployment rate, it's been consistently lower than the national average, and they've attracted a lot of foreign investment. It's a strong case study, Shows the economic benefits pretty clearly.
So Pennsylvania, that's local. What about, a whole country? Any examples of land tax reforms working on that scale?
Definitely. Denmark is often seen as a model for land value taxation. They put a national land tax in place back in the 19th century, and it specifically targeted the unimproved value of land.
Interesting. What was the impact? Did it work?
It worked really well. It encouraged landowners to actually develop their land, make it productive, especially in agriculture. Denmark, they're consistently ranked as one of the happiest, most prosperous countries in the world. A lot of experts think their land tax system has played a big part in that success.
That's pretty amazing. But I bet some people are thinking, sure, Denmark, small country, pretty homogenous. Could it work somewhere bigger, more diverse?
It's a fair question. So let's look at Australia and Melbourne specifically. They've had a land value tax system since the late 1800s, and they've thrived under it.
How did Melbourne's system work? What did they do differently?
Similar to Denmark, they taxed the unimproved value of the land. So again, encouraged development instead of just holding on to land, waiting for a quick profit. The result: Melbourne grew fast, housing stayed relatively affordable, and the economy boomed. Today, it's consistently ranked as one of the world's most livable cities, which proves that land value taxation can work, even in a big, bustling metropolis.
It's encouraging to see these real-world examples, But beyond the specific cases, is there evidence that land taxes are just, generally good for economies?
There is. Studies show a strong correlation between land taxes and economic growth. Countries that rely more heavily on land taxes tend to have more economic activity and less inequality. It's about aligning those economic incentives with what's good for society, making sure everyone benefits.
Okay, I'm starting to get the bigger picture. But even if we agree that land taxes make sense, there's the whole political side of things. How do you get past the resistance from those powerful landowners, the people who benefit from how things are now?
That's the million-dollar question. And honestly, that's where ethical, courageous leadership comes in. The leaders who want to change things, they have to be willing to stand up to those folks, the ones who are profiting from the system as it is. Transparency, putting the needs of the many above the profits of a few, that's what's needed.
Like Henry George, right. All that opposition he faced, but he never gave up. He truly believed that land value taxation was the right thing to do, that it was necessary.
Exactly. We need more leaders like him. And there are inspiring examples out there we can learn from what they did.
Give me some hope here. Tell me about some leaders who actually pulled it off, who managed to navigate those political landmines.
Look at Taiwan in the 1950s. They put in place land value taxation as part of their whole economic reform package. And it was a huge success, helped fund infrastructure, cut down on speculative landholding, all that. And they did it by connecting with people's values. They showed them that it wasn't just about taxes, it was about creating a fairer society.
That's such a crucial point. It can't just be about the numbers, right? You have to appeal to people's sense of what's right, their hopes for the future.
Exactly. And then there's South Korea. Late 1980s, they were dealing with a major housing crisis fueled by all that crazy land speculation. Their president, Roh Tae-woo, he was facing serious pushback, but he went for it, pushed through these big land tax reforms. And his leadership, it made the difference. He built a coalition, got people on board, clearly laid out the benefits, and it worked. They ended up with a much more stable, equitable housing market.
It's pretty amazing, right? It can be done even when those powerful interests are fighting tooth and nail. It takes courage, but it's possible.
It is possible, but it also takes an informed and engaged public, people who understand what's at stake. That's why this kind of conversation, raising awareness, it's so important.
Totally agree. People need to know how these land taxes work, how they can help create a better society, and how we can design them in a way that protects the most vulnerable. Yeah. We can't leave anyone behind.
That's it, exactly. And, we have to be realistic. Reforming these systems, it's not going to be easy. There will be legal battles, political roadblocks, all that. But we can't afford to ignore this issue. It's too important.
You're right. The consequences of doing nothing, well, we've seen them. Inequality runs rampant, housing crises, the environment takes a hit, social unrest, even political instability. It's a recipe for disaster.
It is. But on the flip side, we've also seen what can happen when we get this right. Land tax reform, it can help us fund those essential services, build communities that are fairer, more sustainable. It's not a silver bullet, but it's a powerful tool, a way to create a better future for everyone.
So where do we go from here? What can our listeners do to get involved, make a difference?
I think the first step is simple. Learn more. Dig into the source material for this episode. The book's available on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books. Check it out. The more you know, the better equipped you'll be to have those important conversations about land taxation. Talk to your friends, family, even your elected officials. Make sure they're taking this seriously.
It's about taking action, right?
Yeah.
Because ultimately, the future of land taxation, and maybe even the future of our society, it's in our hands. If those ancient societies could come up with systems like Jubilee, where land was redistributed to prevent inequality, surely we can rethink things today, right?
Yeah.
What role can each of us play in making that happen? Building a world that's more equitable, more just. Those are questions worth asking.
They really are. This whole topic, the history and potential of land taxation, it's fascinating, complex, and it deserves our attention. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Until next time.